Hey, beautiful people, Madhu here, or as some call me, Big G Unit. No, that's a joke. No one calls me that. But I am here to talk about mindset. I'm not sure if you're anything like me, but you hear people talking about abundance and mindset, this, that, the other, and it can sound super woo-woo. It's like, what in the world are these people talking about? It's like, mindset. So I don't know what that is. I would like to give you a really clear understanding of mindset as I've understood it from a more Vedic perspective and a breakdown. And in order to do that, I want to give you a little preface of what it even means to be, when we're talking about mindset, what is the mind according to, and the reason I'm going to give you the Vedic perspective, according to the Vedic perspective on the Vedas, which if you're not familiar, are the oldest written literatures that we know of currently to date, and the most vast philosophical literatures known to man. I want to give you the perspective of that breakdown because I found it to be the most comprehensive and in-depth. And I'm just going to give you a kind of shorthand preface of understanding what even is the mind and who are we in relation to the mind. And then from there, we can start to identify and understand what actually is mindset. What does it mean to be abundant? What does it mean? What is scarcity mindset, et cetera, et cetera. So the shorthand version is this. When we're talking about philosophy, we're talking about two things in existence. There's two things that are just somewhat undeniable. You're going to be able to, because this is a shorthand version, we'll go into this deeper another time, but you're going to find a few exceptions to what I might say, and that's fine. Please share with them below, and I'm happy to rebut each of them and come to a very clear understanding. But there's two things that are undeniable. One is that you're conscious. The fact that you're hearing, the fact that you can ask yourself, am I conscious? You are conscious. There's other steps we might want to get to be able to establish that understanding, that axiom, but I think, therefore I am. The idea that you can even think and contemplate is an indication that you are. And then we also know that there's something outside of yourself. There's the material world, the material energy around you. Now, whether that's an illusion or whether that's real is another conversation. It's absolutely real. It's just temporary. And even if it was false, it's still a variety, which means there's you and there's something else. Even if that variety is illusion, there's two things we're looking at here. Philosophy in simple is a breakdown of those two things, me as a unit of consciousness and everything that I perceive outside of my body to be nature or matter, prakriti. So the unit of consciousness is called the soul, or the atma, the jiva in Sanskrit. And then we have prakriti, means earth, nature, material nature around us. And then if you want to take it one step further and try to give meaning to those things, which everyone wants to some extent or another, whether you admit it or not, you have a philosophy that you follow. And in the same way as everyone has a psychology, and whether you study psychology or not, you have one. Similarly, whether you study philosophy or not, you got one. You've got a set of values that you've put together that you make sense and rectify these two things. Now, those two things in themselves don't really make sense unless you add a third component. And what is that third component? The creation to both of those things. Where do they come from, etc. And that's where a philosophy with these two becomes a theology. Theology. Becomes a theology. Once you introduce the divine factor, or in other words, the creation of the others, the fountainhead, the source of the others, now you start to give more reasoning, and there's other theological breakdowns of why the world is the way it is, etc., etc. If we're looking at theological conceptions, right off the bat, we have to establish there is a higher power than you, whether you like it or not. You don't believe me? Go stand out in the sun for a duration of time. It's just a matter of time till you go, okay, I quit. There are powers higher than me. Go get dropped in the ocean. Be like, yeah, no powers higher than me. LOL, dude. Obviously, power is higher than you. And we can understand that if there's a power higher than you and there's a power higher than that, there ultimately gets to a top. There's a highest power, which we call the OG, the love supreme, as we say here in the West, God, which is a really overly simplified conception of divinity, but that's fine. When we're talking about this conception of divinity, what to speak of being a root of nature that you see around us, as well as the source of consciousness, another conversation for another day, but we also have to look at what type of divinity is there, and there's a lot of conceptions of theology around. The Vedic concept is that you have what we call a triple OG, an omniscient, omnibenevolent, omnibenevolent, omnipotent, divine source. In other words, all powerful, all compassionate, and then all knowing. But there, I'm going to, for the time being, we're going to do a lowercase o. We could get into that later. Why I say lowercase o in terms of omniscient and all knowing, because there's a little caveat, the way you got to make it work with free will. But we're talking about a fully compassionate and a fully powerful entity, because anyone who's not fully powerful is not the source of existence. Just doesn't work. Doesn't make sense. And if we're looking at the source of all power, the source of all existence, it makes sense that the highest of powers will also be the highest of carers, the highest of lovers, the highest of compassionates. Otherwise, if you have an all-powerful God that's not compassionate, then it makes them not powerful, because that means they don't have the power to control their choices, their opinions, and ultimately have a sense of divinity. And also, if you're worshiping an all-powerful God, which is somewhat of, you find in the Abrahamic conceptions of divinity, everything from Islam, Judaism, Christianity, etc., there's this conception that God's all-powerful, but not necessarily all-compassionate. Don't belong to the wrong church, otherwise you will have to suffer in hell for, a little bit of time, kind of eternity, because you belong to the wrong church. It's an unfortunate perspective, and that would indicate that God is not all compassionate and all loving, because an all loving God would want to provide you all opportunity to be able to connect with yourself, with Him, with ultimate conception of spirituality, as opposed to just smiting you because they feel like it. That's a strong limitation to divinity. So, all powerful, all compassionate, and then all knowing, knows everything except, with the exception. There's a little footnote there. We're talking about that. You have to account for free will. You, a unit of consciousness, you have free will. That means you have choice, you have agency, you get to make decisions. That means whatever decision you make today creates a reaction, which is usually how we look at the term karma in the West. Karma, if you ask anyone in English what karma means, they usually say reaction, even though it's Sanskrit, it actually just means action. Karma from the root kri. We're talking about karma. Every action you make creates a unique and different reaction to that. And so you are at all times you have free will, so you're at all times creating your future destiny or future outcomes depending on your decisions. Divinity doesn't necessarily know every decision you're going to make. He simply knows all the options that you could be making. In other words, then what all of the potential outcomes might be. I said I'd give you the shorthand version, but I can't resist going a little bit deeper. This conception of divinity, all-powerful, all-knowing, all-compassionate, all-loving, alongside with the basic philosophy of you are an individual soul, a unit of consciousness that simply makes decisions, that creates your own free will, and every decision you make then creates a particular limited amount of options of decisions from there. That's the concept of karma. Destiny is what happens to you. Your free will is how you respond, and your karma is what's created when you respond to your destiny or what's happened to you. You as someone with free will, divinity being triple OG, and then this material nature, which however unfactual it might seem and illusory it might seem, it's only illusory because it's temporary and it's cyclical. It's only here for a few moments. However, it's still real. It still exists in an ultimate concept of reality. Let's put it this way. You perceive it. Whether it exists or not, at this point of the conversation, somewhat irrelevant because you experience it to be real in the present as we're speaking. These three concepts together create theology, and that understanding that I'm sharing according to this, you could say, philosophical theological conception of divinity, you being a unique unit of consciousness, and this material nature being a facility place for you to experience consciousness within matter, creates the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether, that 5 gross elements that you can experience, ether being synonymous with space. That creates the vessel from which you as a unit of consciousness can inhabit, because you're a soul, you're not a body, you're not a mind. Hate to break it to you, whether you like it or not. You're a soul, eternal, blissful, full of bliss and fully cognizant. But you need some type of facility to experience the consciousness with, and that's matter. That's this third category here. All right, Madhu, why are you telling me all this? I thought we were talking about mindset. We are. There's 5 what we call here as we're calling them gross elements, or elements that are perceivable to the eyes. And then we have what are called, according to the Vedic conception, we have 3 subtle elements. These elements are called the mind, the intellect, and the ego. The manasa, the buddhir, and the ahankara. What these are what we call subtle elements, or a subtle body. This is the part of you that transmigrates when the 5 material elements give up, when this body is done. When you leave this body, the soul leaves the body. What travels into the next body is what's called the subtle body, or the mind, intellect, ego, which is the subtle form that the soul is driving around for a temporary amount of time. The manasa is the reactionary mind. It's often, you can correspond it to what we call the subconscious mind. It's reactionary, it's emotional. It takes in the conglomerate of information and just gives you a response based on what your conditioning is, based on how you've trained it. It's just, it reacts, it doesn't, it's a reacting system, and it usually accepts and rejects. Yes, no. It's just a quick responding system, which thank God we have that, because most of the things we do are on autopilot at all times. And thank God we can also train our subconscious mind, or our manasa. We'll get back into that in a minute when it comes to mindset. The next level is what's called the buddhi, or the intellect. This is the discerning ability. This is the logical conception where one can actually respond to life as opposed to react to life. This is what would be often referred to in modern psychology as what we'd say the conscious mind. This is the conscious mind, the ability to respond to life in a way that you actually want to, in the way that you can train to. And this can still be trained, but this is where intellectualization happens. This is where conceptions start to be built, so you can build logical premises, etc. Or illogical, but this is a reasoning capacity. And then from there you have the ahankara, which is called the false ego. This is the ultimate conception of self. Think of this in simple, as if this was simple concepts. Think of this in terms of your ultimate identity of self, or self of identity, however you want to break it down. Your ultimate conception of who you are as an individual according to the conglomerate of conditioning that you've developed. False ego. So when we're talking about mindset, what we're primarily referring to is these 3 subtle elements: the mind, intellect, and ego. The ability to train the mind happens on all 3 platforms, but specifically whenever it comes to changing things, we're talking about the conscious mind, or the buddhi, taking in information and then making decisions and reasoning based off of that to promote a different type of response, as opposed to just living off of autopilot default with the manasa, with the mind, the subconscious mind. If you just act off default, not making conscious decisions, we've all seen what direction that brings us in. And if you're not sure, if you were one of those transcendent souls that have no idea what I'm talking about, go to your local mall or somewhere else and just witness what it looks like to just be on autopilot. Many other examples of that. You guys know what I'm referring to. So, when we're talking about mindset and we're talking about changing the mind, we're talking about changing things from a conscious mind, or a buddhi perspective, going in and voluntarily training the mind how you want to respond to life and different circumstances, different opportunities there. So when we're talking about mindset, that's what we're referring to. When we're referring to abundance versus scarcity mindset, what we want to conceive of this idea, scarcity means there are minimal limited sources. Abundance means there is no limit to source. Okay? When we're talking about these two, and which is it? Is there limited resources, which I learned in economics class in 5th grade? Or is there abundance? Is there no shortage to anything? Well, let's go back to our philosophical and theological breakdown. Would an all-powerful, all-compassionate, all-knowing divine source create a world and an experience of reality where there are limited resources? Let me ask this another way. How much resource does divinity have? A little bit of money, a little bit of money, a lot of bit of money. How much? An inexhaustible, inconceivable amount of, you name it, because the source of everything is divinity. So how much wealth, beauty, strength, wisdom, etc. does divinity have? Unlimited. Actually, there's a name in Sanskrit for Bhagavan, which you might have heard. You read this book, the Bhagavad Gita, the Song of Bhagavan. Bhagavan Gita gets conjugated to Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavan means the possessor of all opulences. And all the opulences there, like I said, strength, wealth, beauty, renunciation, wisdom, fame. These are the 6 primary opulences. The world has them in full. This concept that divinity has everything in full means that there is an access to abundance. So right off the bat, if we're understanding the concept of divinity, we understand there's a concept of abundance because there's no shortage within divinity. Now, within this world, you may perceive a shortage of certain types of resources. However, would an all-powerful, all-loving God be able to provide unlimited access to these types of resources? Absolutely, it's possible. 100% is possible. He can do it, so why can't it be done? The idea is that one must tap into that access, or one must tap into an understanding that there is no shortage of anything. And even if externally, let's just say, okay, there's only X amount of gold in the world available, and then the next day, how much more gold can be found? One could lock up a bunch of commodities in a big vault and put it in the bottom of the ocean, and it's gone forever. And then the next day, twice as many come out of the earth. There is no shortage. Where there is the desire for resources, there is the opportunity for resources to exist, because divinity, who has no shortage of resources, can provide anything, because it's all powerful, and wants to provide anything that would be beneficial for the soul's advancement. What the soul's advancement looks like is another conversation for another time, but we're just going to simplify it now to say that the nature of the soul is to love and to serve, and if you love someone, what do? You serve them. It's just that simple, and that the ultimate concept of reality is loving relationships. We'll get to that another time, but it's a fun topic, but it's a little tangential. When we're talking about abundance, there is no limit to divinity. So therefore, if you tap into that divine resource, there is no limits even here in a world where resources are seemingly sparse. That doesn't mean that there aren't limits. Because you're in a material world where there's a beginning and there's an end, there are going to be limits. But the idea that there has to be limits and there's no flexibility outside of that, that's a very atheistic concept. That's a very dystheistic concept. So when we're talking about abundance, we're specifically referring to this idea that there is an opportunity for unlimited resources to become available at all times for all individuals according to one's decision and desires in life. So tapping into abundance isn't something where God is our shot caller, is our give me my daily bread. He's not just someone that we actually. When I say divinity, it's not so simple. Divinity is both masculine and feminine. It's another conversation. But it's not that we say, God, give me this, give me that, do this for me. Nah, it's not a loving relationship. It's like a child's relationship to the parents. What is that like? A child, give me. No one wants to be with that kid. Don't be that kid. The idea is more, rather than say, give me this, I deserve it. It's not like that. It's you act in such a way as to welcome divine resources into your life, which are abundant, and whether they come or not, that's not on you. Don't worry. You got to do your duty, do your dharma, or act on your purpose. Whatever happens, you can't control the future. Don't even try, little jiva, little soul. You can hardly control your bowels, what to speak of the universe. So don't even try. However, you can act and live in such a way as to welcome and to qualify yourself to be able to handle and deal with these types of opulences, these types of resources. To the extent that you are trusted with them is to the extent that they will be offered and gifted to you under different situations and circumstances. So, when we're referring to a type of abundance mindset or this type of philosophy or theology, this is what we're referring to. Act in such a way, qualify and develop your ability to manage and navigate these types of resources that are there in abundance so as to welcome them. Hopefully they come. It's not that you can't control the material nature. Like I said, don't even try. Can't control your eyelids. They just have to shut at some point. Can't even control your mouth, Madhu. The idea is that you qualify yourself to welcome them in, and if they come, fantastic. And if they don't, great, that's better. Fortunately, I'd rather trust someone all-knowing than myself, because I don't know a lot of things. I don't like those 3 words. I don't know, but occasionally you'll hear me say them. I don't like those 3 words because I don't know means I quit to find the answer. In case if you ever ask someone a question, I don't know. I don't know means I quit to find the answer. Don't be a quitter. You're better than that. The idea is that you cultivate and qualify yourself to be able to handle these types of resources. That is what an abundance mindset is. Okay, now let's just come back to the three subtleties of, we have the manasa, the mind, the buddhir, the discerning ability, and then we have the ego, the ahankara. So when we're talking about developing an abundance mindset, we're talking about acting from the conscious perspective to putting new inputs into the brain to change the neural pathways from stimuli to response. So according to the manas, the mind, you have a stimuli and your mind goes a certain direction. You see something I like. You see something I don't like. That's just how the mind responds. Primarily what we're trying to do is bring things to a conscious mind perspective, to this buddhir, the intellect, and then from there putting inputs that will, over time as we practice them, change the pathway. So instead of when that stimuli happens, I go, I like, I don't like, and it becomes thoughtless, it becomes reactionary. We want to train the brain to go in a direction and a perspective that we want. That is the concept of developing any kind of mindset. What to speak of an abundance mindset is overwhelming your intellectual reasoning side, discerning side, with knowledge that illuminates it, which is interesting in Sanskrit. This word for knowledge and illumination and light is the same, vidya. Vidya means both light and illumination. Similarly, avidya, which negates, when you short a before it, negates it. Avidya indicates a lack of light, darkness, or a lack of knowledge, ignorance. Fun fact. When we're talking about illuminating the mind, it's like bringing knowledge or bringing light into the mind so that one can see things clearly and respond to life in a way that's, well, conscious, that's purposeful, that's reasonable. You want to overwhelm your conscious mind with practices or things that you could practice regularly to push you into a direction of understanding that there's unlimited resources that can be touched and tapped into at any time, under all circumstances, especially if you're using them for the purpose of life, which is ultimately service and love. Shorthand. Much more we're going to go into it. I'd love to hear what are the particular areas that you want to go a little bit deeper into, because I just wanted to give you, as we're going to be breaking down mindset, I think it's essential that you have a clear idea of what we're talking about. Otherwise, just this, you're any idea, you'll chase it. And if we're not getting some type of axiom to come back to, some foundation, everything becomes flowery. It's mindset. It's all about, it's like, I don't know about you guys, but I'm like, when somebody starts talking like that, I'm like, I'm not into it. Like, give me something reasonable here. Don't get me wrong. I mean, like, most of the things I do, people would probably think are woo-woo, but they're reasonable. I like to practice that actually make logical sense. So let me know below, what are the particular areas based on what we talk about that you'd like to go a little bit deeper into, so I can make some content around that. We're going to be coming up with a lot more soon. So if you're enjoying this type of content, go ahead and like and subscribe and share this with someone that could benefit from this type of knowledge, because I'm here to sincerely just try to give this information that my amazing teachers have shared with me that have completely changed my life. The reason I have such a fortunate, blessed, successful life is because of the knowledge my teachers have shared with me that I've implemented, and now I would just like to share them with you full-heartedly without any reservation to try to help you continue to improve your quality of life as well. Okay, we'll see you in the next one.